American empire is over, and we ought to be paying attention so we can try to avoid catastrophe as we decline. The United States is losing the competition with China. Now, China is a lender to the United States government. China has been demanding repayment in dollars. It has been reducing its holdings of U.S. debt by hundreds of billions of dollars. The whole world. Economic growth is faster in the East than it is in the West. The G7 and the BRICS had the same total GDP in the year 2020. Now the BRICS have about 3 or 4% more than the G7. Capitalism has always had financial problems. The way the system works produces financial problems. Here in the United States, we have a governmental system that works as follows. On the one hand, you have corporations and the rich. They are a minority, but they provide the money for political parties. A political party, Republican and Democrat, spend an enormous amount of money. They buy time on television. Everything is done by mass media, by social media, and so forth. So for a candidate or a party to win, they need to get a lot of money. And that money comes overwhelmingly from corporations and the rich. And they don't want to be taxed. So what corporations and the rich want from the government is lots of service. They want 800 military bases so that nobody will interfere with exports or imports or all of that. They want the government to help them, to educate workers so that they are productive, to all of that. Prisons, we have an enormous prison population, all of that. Then there are the mass of people, the working class, the employees. They too want services from the government. They want schools, they want hospitals, they want roads to be working, and so forth. And they don't want to pay taxes either, but they're not so powerful. They don't have any money to give the politicians, but to give them votes. And the politicians, once a year, need some votes. So we have the following capitalist system. Politicians, faced with the need to raise money from corporations and the rich, but without the power really to tax them. Because if you tax them, they won't give you the money. They'll give the money to somebody else who's running against you. You'll be out of there within the next year or two, and in will come somebody who plays the game. And likewise, you can't keep putting the taxes on the mass of people because they don't have enough. And they're going to rise up again. That's dangerous. So you have to provide services, but you can't tax. How do you handle that problem? And the way that capitalists have handled that problem in the West is by borrowing, because that way we can spend it on what people need, but without taxing them. It's just, and they will vote for us and they will give us money. And that's how it works. But the problem is you accumulate an enormous national debt, adding up each year's deficits between what the government spends and what it raises in taxes. The important thing to understand about this, though, which many people don't, is that this is very good for corporations and the rich for as long as it lasts. Why? Because when the government borrows, who does it borrow from? It borrows from corporations and the rich. Nobody else has money to lend to the government. The government lets corporations and the rich not pay taxes and then comes back to them and says, lend the government the money that you didn't. For corporations and the rich, this is, of course, wonderful. Instead of paying taxes, say goodbye to your money, they get to give the government a loan, which the government will pay back plus interest on the loan. So for corporations and the rich, going ever deeper into debt is perfectly acceptable, which is why corporations and the rich are now permitting, here in the United States, we run deficits in the trillions of US dollars every year, like this year. And corporations and the rich, they worry only because at a certain point, when you borrow more and more, you run the risk that some of the lenders, the very corporations and the rich, will decide it is too risky. You are so in debt that there may be an uprising from the people which will say you cannot repay the debt. You have to take care of us first. Now, China is a lender to the United States government. China and Japan are the number 1 and 2 lenders to the US government. China has been demanding repayment in dollars. It has been reducing its holdings of US debt by hundreds of billions of dollars over the last few years. This is an important sign that in China, too, there's the beginning of the worry that the debts are going up so fast that you're getting closer to a crisis when the mass of people say, we will not continue to pay the taxes. You need to repay the debt, which you only got because you weren't willing to tax corporations and the rich. That's why in the United States, an enormous amount of time and energy is spent by leading economists to explain deficits and national debts in every conceivable way other than what I've just told you, because they don't want the mass of people to realize that a debt is simply postponing the burden of taxation on the employees in order to benefit the employers who get out of paying a tax and have a government loan instead. If the mass of people understood what I've just told you, then they would not allow this kind of deficit spending, and they would demand that taxes be raised on corporations and the rich because they have evaded their share of taxes for many years, and because they are the richest and therefore most able to pay to get out. But my guess is we're not going to solve this problem until it blows up. And if you ask me, when will it blow up? I can't answer that question, because that's a question really of when does capitalism run out of its mechanisms to stay in power? I think that capitalism is declining everywhere in the world, with the exceptions, perhaps, of Asia. And now comes my important point, I think. Over the last 30, 40 years, we have seen the latest relocation of the dynamic center of capitalist industry and growth. It has left Western Europe, it has left North America, and it has left Japan. And it has gone, above all, to the People's Republic of China, but also to places like India and Brazil and other Vietnam and other parts of the world. But it has left the old part. And that is how capitalism has always worked. It has always relocated following where profits were the greatest. And so, for example, here in the United States, many companies, many of our largest corporations over the last 40 years grew their enterprises in China or in India or in Brazil or in Vietnam. Wages were lower, India, China, and Brazil, and the economic market was growing faster than in Europe, North America, and Japan. And we are seeing the consequences for those that are able to see it, who are able to admit it, who are not blinded by their own ideology. And I have to tell you that in much of Europe and in much of North America, the major response to the relocation of capitalism to the east, mostly to the south and the east, has been what psychologists call denial. They haven't admitted it. Politicians have felt that what they must say to the people is that we are strong and we are powerful and we are what we were. This has happened before in history. It takes some time before the people living through the relocation of capitalism will finally be able to face it, to admit it, and to begin to deal with it. We're not there yet. And whether you look at the war in Ukraine, or you look at foreign policy of the West, or you look, for example, at the conflict around Taiwan in the South China Sea, you see a West that still thinks it has the dominant power. It doesn't. And the statistic I use to drive this point home to people is that if you look at the GDP, the gross domestic product, which measures the total output of goods and services in 1 year, if you look at the total GDP of the United States and its major allies, the G7, United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. It is significantly less right now than the GDP of China and its allies in the BRICS, that other new alliance. So that tells the whole world economic growth is faster in the East than it is in the West. The G7 and the BRICS had the same total GDP in the year 2020. Now the BRICS have about 3 or 4% more than the G7. And that shows you that the gap between them is getting larger. This is reshaping global capitalism and all world affairs. We are living through that, but I think the important thing is to realize that this is what's going on, to understand that every country in the world, your country, my country, all are now rethinking their foreign policies, their place in the world, the future of their industries, because the economic situation of the world economy is changing so dramatically. We've got problems, and here's one of them. We are weaker than we were, but that can't be confronted. No one dares say that. We don't have enough jobs for our own people. We can't pay our own people properly. We are hysterical as a nation with the problems we can't solve and the magical scapegoats with which our leaders propose to distract us. I want to talk about the open-ended, murky matter of where the administration of Mr. Trump might end up taking us in terms of the world economy. I'm going to begin with Mexico. That's one of the countries that's been in the news a lot, partly because the threat of the Trump administration to deport 15 million undocumented immigrants, most of which would be deported across our southern border into Mexico. At the same time, he has threatened to impose tariffs of all kinds on some or all of Mexico's exports into the United States. And Mexico, because it's a relatively poor country, the remittances, that's what we call the money going back across the border to Mexico, are a very important part of the Mexican economy. It enables villagers to buy things in their little communities because they have the money sent by their relatives in the United States. If you suddenly deport millions of people, the remittances are going to crash. They're not going to come to Mexico. That would be a shock of major importance. But it's only the beginning of what these deportations and these tariffs that are threatened, what they mean. The Mexican economy, since the time of the NAFTA agreement signed by President Clinton and later renewed by President Trump in his first term, those specifically block the United States from imposing tariffs. That's why those treaties were signed, and they were signed by 2 U.S. presidents. Well, the Mexican economy, the largest export market for Mexico, is the United States. If you raise the price to Americans of everything coming from Mexico because you add a tax, that's all a tariff is, a tax on something coming in from Mexico to the U.S., you're going to stop Americans from buying Mexican exports the way they have. Right. That's going to close their markets in their major market. You know what it's going to do? Throw millions of Mexicans out of work. Those jobs are going to disappear. Do the American people really want a fundamentally destabilized society along 1,000 miles of a common border? Keep that image in mind. The history of the United States is the history of an economy which in the 19th and 20th century grew spectacularly because it was strong enough to invite and to absorb millions upon millions of immigrants. And we were strong enough. We aren't anymore. We can't. We don't have enough jobs for our own people. We can't pay our own people properly. And when we bring in immigrants, they become horrified by what's happening to them and terrifying to the people already here. We are weaker than we were. No one dares say that. So instead, we have a narrative round up all the bad people and deport them. That's what Mr. Trump's message was in his first campaign, his second, and his third. He has been beating that drum till literally the dead horse has died and gone to heaven. It's over and over, but that's all it is, an attempt to change the narrative so he doesn't have to say to the American people what an honest leader would. We've got problems, and here's one of them. We are hysterical as a nation with the problems we can't solve and the magical scapegoats with which our leaders propose to distract us. Every capitalist around the world thinking about where they like to build their industry up. Do you want to become dependent on the United States as a market? You used to think, oh yeah, I'd love to penetrate that market, to have sales. Whoa, wait a minute. You're now talking about a country that, as a matter of regular politics, discusses and acts to exploit your vulnerability. Oh, you sell here? We'll hit you with a tariff. We'll cut your market off suddenly. There'll be nothing you can do about it. You will have lost all that you invested in building a market there. And in case people are thinking, well, that won't happen, it's already happening. We've talked about it, you and I. The best, lowest priced electric cars in the world are now made in China by the BYD Corporation. All over the world, the competitors of the United States and even American companies active in those parts of the world are able to buy as inputs the best quality, cheapest electric vehicles. But those of the competitors in the United States can't do that because it's twice the price. It's 100% tariff that Mr. Biden put on and that Mr. Trump will presumably maintain since he started the chain of tariffs on China. Okay, that's bad for the United States. That means competitors outside will have lower cost inputs than their competitors inside. And that means in the long run, and the long run is a few years here, that's shrinkage of jobs here and jobs moving overseas. I thought we didn't want that to happen, but that's a consequence of what you are doing. You're making the United States a pariah, rogue economic partner. And it's going to dissuade all kinds of businesses, private and public, from putting much faith and much investment in the United States. It's a very bad deal that we are showing the world we would do. For 100 years, the Republican Party, the GOP, has been the champion of low taxes. That's its ultimate appeal. That's why the majority of higher income Americans tilt Republican, because the money they want to keep. They don't want to pay it in taxes. And they have the money to buy the politicians who will do that for them. And yet, what have we got? We've got the latest Republican leader being a champion of tariffs. Those are taxes. He's championing raising taxes on all of us for what we buy from Mexico, for what we buy from China. What? And he's getting it. He got into the White House championing what the Republican Party he leads has denounced for 100 years. If you were wondering whether the economy is changing, there's your proof. Well, then I'm the bearer of bad news. That day is already well underway. New economic reality in the world is called the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which has now mushroomed to 23 countries. For example, last week, Indonesia joined the BRICS as a full partner. Indonesia is one of the largest countries in the world. It has 280 million people. It's just a little bit smaller than the United States. It made a decision to go with an alliance of countries whose core is China, the supposed enemy of the United States. You'd think people would say, well, wait. But here's the worst part of it. The number one goal of the BRICS, to develop means of trade among countries that don't use the dollar or other instruments controlled by the United States, because it's unreliable. No other reason. It's not an ideological. The United States showed that it would seize other people's money. It took Russia 300 billion or 400 billion from Russia because of the war. And then it has been imposing sanctions left and right. It's weaponizing its economic position. And what the BRICS represents is the reaction of the rest of the world to not wanting to be vulnerable in that way. Perfectly predictable. Only they've succeeded in kind of record time, and they now represent well over half the population of this planet. The United States is 4.5% of the population of this planet. There's no contest here. They are making the dollar less and less important in the world. The ramifications, the implications, the consequences of all that, they are worrisome anxieties in the back of people's mind. But all of what's going on is pushing them more and more to the forefront alongside the specifics of Mexico, Indonesia, and all the rest. Yeah, and that everything points to that tipping close getting closer and closer. Nobody, including me, can predict the timing of all of these things. There are too many variables. Each of them is overdetermined by too many influences. So we can only see the broad outlines. We can see rough directions things are taking. But those directions indicate, and this is sort of my final thought for today, we are a weak economy. We cannot absorb immigrants. We cannot tolerate challenging economies like that in China. We cannot hold on to our own alliance. I want to remind you, the European Union includes the country of Denmark. Denmark is the country that owns literally Greenland. And we are now seriously discussing taking Greenland from our fellow NATO member. If that is done militarily, and that is part of what the Trump administration is talking about, that would be an attack on a NATO country. And given the NATO agreement, Part 5 of that agreement, Chapter 5, any attack on a NATO member will be responded to by all of NATO, which means the United States will have to fight the United States. But that's very symbolically, it tells you how out of control things have become. And we can pretend otherwise, we can ignore it, like that we ignored that Indonesia joined the BRICS last week, hardly mentioned here in the United States. It's an amazing process we're going through. The decline of the American empire, the decline of American capitalism, and the whole thing covered over with a level of denial that's pathological. Tariff is just a name given to a particular kind of tax. It's a tax that is applied when an object is produced outside the United States, but brought inside to be sold. So a bottle of French wine that is sold in your local liquor store, that's an import. And a duty, used to be called import duty, is a tax on that import. Mr. Trump has variously suggested he's going to throw a tariff against everybody. He has mentioned rates that go from 10% to 60% and possibly more in the case of China because he wants to punish them. And then he says things, I'm going to hit the Chinese with a tariff. Well, that shows he's either a hustler or an ignoramus. And I don't know. I'll let him choose which one he wants. Here's the irony. It'll make the inflation in this country go crazy, which is why he can't do it, because the price of everything will go up. I mean, in the morning, you have a cup of coffee. That comes from abroad. We don't grow coffee in quantities in this country. That has to be imported. You put sugar in it. That has to be imported also. Okay, get ready for $25 lattes in the morning. That's going to hurt. You know who's going to get the blame? Mr. Trump and his nutty way of thinking. They take all this seriously. President Trump is going to whack the Chinese with a tariff. It's all nutty. This is Madison Avenue advertising gone crazy, distracting people from all the real issues that are changing and threatening their lives. And they go into this zone of make-believe. It's like in an amusement park when you're in the dark tunnel and the world isn't the way it really is.